tell us, what is your role at Univision?
Well, I head up the corporate research function, and because Univision is such a multimedia company, that's measurement of our audience in linear TV, cable TV, VOD, local TV, radio, digital, social, mobile. We're touching our audience in a lot of different ways, and we have to measure all of it.
You could do a little bragging. #1 for adults 18 to 34 in prime time.
Oh, did you hear that?
Yes,
yeah,
true.
We've had a good year. Yeah.
Well, we know what she does. Ceril, what are you doing at Univision?
Well, I do the fun stuff. I let her do the day-to-day stuff. I do the fun stuff. And while I was sitting here this morning and I was looking at the screen and seeing the name of this conference, I finally realized what it is I do and what I have been doing for so many years in research, and that's figuring out how to measure the unmeasured. I did that when I was at Nielsen and we created the Hispanic service, because at that point, no one was really measuring Hispanics or Spanish media correctly. And now, here we are, many years later, and we're trying to figure out how do we measure the unmeasured users of mobile and the unmeasured users of social media. And oh, by the way, when you're figuring that out, you better put Hispanics in.
Well, part of the conversation's also been about social and mobile. Social, Hispanics?
Oh, social. Hispanics are huge social users. We're seeing that more and more in television, very high numbers. And I think as researchers, it's a very interesting challenge. We've talked about in the last session about how you make innovation actionable. Well, here's this stuff that comes in all the time, 24 hours a day. So we're finding we have to deal with social really at two levels. We certainly are looking at, month to month, week to week, how did the Latin Grammys do this year versus a year ago? But we also have people sitting in master control, following the tweets and the Facebook feeds in real time so that they can work with the producers and adjust the content to put great tweets on the screen. So that's the fastest turnaround I think anyone's ever seen in research.
About how many Hispanic Americans are there in the country? About?
Well, of course, it changes every day. We hit more than 50 million at the 2010 census, and we're headed to 52, 54, as we speak.
So that's a bit about social. Mobile and Hispanic Americans?
Well, Hispanics are also very heavy users of mobile, and in fact, they were the heaviest users of mobile before everyone else started using mobile for anything but a telephone. And that's because many of the Hispanics grew up in areas where cell phones were the way they communicated. And so they became the highest users of extra activities on a telephone, on a cell phone, of any group of customers. And they began using their cell phones for watching media, for doing a lot more than just communicating, and they continue to be among the heaviest users of mobile. And again, we want to make sure that when people start to measure mobile and include that in their ratings, that there is a fair and accurate measurement of the Hispanics' use of both social and mobile.
But that costs money.
It's a shame, but I think we're all in this business to make money. Advertisers want to reach people who are going to buy their products. We want to put on the air programs that people will watch. Mm-hmm. And if you don't spend the money for good programming, if you don't spend the money for good advertising, and if then you don't spend the money for good, reliable research, you're wasting your money.
Well, you just told us, you just said something about how important those two venues, social and mobile, are, and Hispanic Americans, but I don't hear that much about this. Is there a reason why, to some extent, the message is not getting out there? Is it?
Well, I have to say, one of the things that has surprised me since I joined Univision is how often people cold call me or send me emails, try to send me pieces of research, surveys, whatever type of research, purporting to be representative of all the United States. Right. And the first question I always ask is, well, what about Hispanic? Have you included Hispanic? Have you included Spanish-speaking Hispanics? And I am still to this day stunned at how many people say, well, no, or a little, or well, we'll get to that in phase 2. So I think to some degree there is still a lot of information out there that is sort of blind to the Hispanic part of the population. It's as if somebody tried to sell you something and said, well, it's a national survey, but we didn't do anything on the West Coast. California, Oregon, Washington didn't include them.
You mean they have to include New York?
Right. Part of the theme here is we have to have research quality. Now, I want to take a few more minutes on this. Ceril, as legend in this area, what is research quality? How do you define it?
Well, I define it as research that properly and adequately measures all of the users, measures the United States if that's what you're measuring, a local market if that's what you're measuring. And the problem is you can't compensate for what you're not measuring. It is why it's so important to increase response rates. It's so important to have a representative sample, and by increasing response rates, you get that. And when people started looking at social ratings, you would see an NA for every Spanish language program because no one was measuring Hispanic media in terms of social. How could that be when they're such heavy users of social? It's because it cost more, it took longer, they didn't know how to do it. You mean we have to translate all our survey documents? We'll just leave it out. And that's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable. It should not be acceptable to anyone in this room.
Well, I want to pick up on that. Faster, better, cheaper. There's some people tuning out right now knowing this is a fact of life. What are you talking about? You get to choose only two of them. So what's your response to that? I mean, this is a reality, right? Faster, cheaper, better?
Mostly it's the cheaper that gets them.
Okay, true.
Mostly but it costs more to include a usable, and we get the English-speaking ones. Do we really care about the others? Well, you should care about the others. So if you're going to do it, and you're going to get rid of accuracy, if you're going to get rid of quality, you might as well not do it because the research you get, if you act on it, will be incorrect and you really won't get your money's worth.
What if there's a gun in my head and I say, I'm going to do it anyway? I'm going to do it anyway, I'm going to do it faster, I'm going to do it cheaper, because the problem is if it takes too long, it's not useful anymore. It's a reality.
But if it's not accurate, it wasn't useful at all.
And this is not just, of course, talking about Hispanic audience. We're talking about everything.
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 If you don't include cell phone-only homes in a sample, you are missing a significant portion of the population. You can do it cheaper by not including them. You just use a telephone frame and you don't include them. But anyone who's making decisions based on that research is probably making bad decisions.
Well, I think we saw that with the election. I think we saw some of the polling.
So a lot of that in the election. That's why the predictions were so off.
Except the ones that
included cell
phones and did the demographics carefully. What's important right now in terms of Hispanic research? You're looking over the horizon. You're doing today's work and tomorrow's work. What's the type of requests you get from advertisers? What's some of the work?
Well, we heard a little about it from the gentleman from Gallo in the last session. It's understanding the insights, it's understanding the behaviors, not doing marketing to Hispanics by anecdote. You hear a little of that when he said, Hispanics don't drink wine.
Wasn't it a riot? We learned that the 10 Hispanic Americans audience do drink wine. So there's good research we could use, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think a lot of what we help clients with is get beyond the anecdote, to really understand the size of the prize, what the insights are, how to use the media and how to reach them. There are still clients who will do solid research on the general market, copy testing, those sort of things, MMMs, everything else, and then get to Hispanic, tuck it to some special multicultural group and not give it the same discipline.
What about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And one thing is, if you don't get the right information and you're making bad decisions, you're leaving part of your audience, part of your buyers out. Hispanics watch television somewhat differently. They're much more live watchers when they're watching Spanish, but they do time shift, but it's usually when they're watching English. They use social media in a different way. They are heavy users, but they use it in a different way. They use mobile in somewhat a different way. So if you don't understand the nuances, how are you going to reach them and how are you going to sell to them?
Well, it's also a little tricky. I'm stating the obvious, which you all know. Those of us who live in the New York metropolitan area, it's more people of Puerto Rican background. And now you're going to tell me I have to make sure I get even the subgroups correct?
Absolutely, but you don't make decisions on what's going to sell in California by what you see in New York.
Or leave out 12 to 17, for example.
Or leave out 12 to 17.
But you told me, Cyril's been around even a year more than I have been around, and you said that people were talking to you about retirement, and you had an interesting comment you made about that.
Well, I keep setting a date. I keep saying, yeah, I'm going to retire, I've done all this. And then we come up with a new challenge. And I can't leave because I want to know how that challenge is going to be solved. So let's slow down. Let's not do anything new anymore so I can just go home and read books and get a dog.
Didn't you, Elizabeth, go to a conference where there was a very interesting question asked about measurement?
Yeah, the Future of Television conference. I was on the measurement panel, and someone put up his hand in the Q&A and said, well, when are we going to be done? When is measurement going to be settled? And we sort of had to laugh and say, well, never. You know, I look at, the news about Google Glasses or, refrigerators or biometrics, everything else that's coming along that may have a media component, and every one of those is going to need research, it's going to need measurement, it's going to need currency. I don't see an end.
Well, I think that's an optimistic note to end on. So I'll be around for a while longer. Let's thank our two guests very much for this conversation. Thank you. I think that was delightful.